Welcome back, folks, to the Get a Grip on Life podcast. On today's show, I have Angela Andrews, and we are going to talk about autism. It's an interesting topic. I'm not going to say anything about it yet because all my questions are for Angela. If you're looking to make some digital media, if you're looking to start your own podcast, go to getagripstudios.com. Welcome to the Get a Grip on Life podcast, Angela.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so you know what? Tell me, autism's a funny thing for the average population that doesn't have experience with it. It's kind of like one of those words where everybody's heard the word, but most people don't really know what it is. What is autism?
Okay, so autism just simply it's a neurodiverse condition where the brain is wired differently. So it can cause effects in social skills, it can cause some sensory problems. So like your senses don't work exactly the same way as other people's would, and it can cause some speech issues as well.
When
So
do
that's the
people
very short, simple way to put it.
when do people get diagnosed with autism? Like how old are they when they're like, this kid has autism?
It really depends, and it can also depend on if they have any other conditions that are already being investigated, and then they'll inadvertently find the autism. So I've heard of children being diagnosed as young as a year and a half. If they're
Really?
very severely handicapped in multiple ways, the autism will kind of get picked up with the other disabilities. There's also adults who are in their 50s who are being diagnosed. So it really is a very broad range, and it really depends on where you live. It depends on how knowledgeable people are in that area about autism. And it actually also depends on your gender. Boys usually are diagnosed much earlier than girls. That trend is starting to shift, but it's still very much you'll see girls are much older when they get diagnosed than boys typically.
And so how does autism affect one's life? What does it cause? Um what is it that people are perceiving as being different? What's the type of behaviors? How does it manifest itself?
Okay, well, in children, which is the most common age to be diagnosed, is between the ages of like 2 and 10. Um, a little bit later for girls, but typically you'll see things like, for example, they'll either speak very late or they won't speak at all, or on the other side they might speak very early and have what would be considered a quite unusual vocabulary for a small child. Great example, my youngest daughter was diagnosed when she was 4. um, she started speaking, and I don't mean mama, dad, I mean like 2, 3 words together right after her first birthday. And when she was very small, she would say things like, "Mother, I would like to go see my companions outdoors, please," at like 4 years old.
Hmm.
So her vocabulary was very unusual, for a 4-year-old.
Sure.
So speech can be affected basically in those two ways. You also might see they repeat things. For example, if they hear a TV show, you might notice later that they're repeating a phrase or two over and over again, or they may have a couple shows that they watch constantly and will actually recite the show with the show
Mm-hmm.
while it's playing. Or when you're in a conversation with them, you'll notice that they say the last 2 or 3 words you say. It's just their brain trying to process, because many people with autism have something called an auditory processing delay. So rather than they pick up the sound, their brain immediately understands it, it takes a couple seconds for their brain to register what the words were. And that repeating can help. And it becomes like an accidental thing almost. Many of them don't realize they're doing it. And in fact, if you have someone who signs, they will echo with sign language. It's
Oh, really?
actually kind of fascinating to see. Yeah,
Wow.
you'll catch them signing the last
Huh.
few words said down by their leg or something. So
Huh.
yeah, it's something that's very unique. And it kind of shows that it doesn't matter if you can hear or not, the echolalia apparently is still going to be present.
Hmm.
So another big one is sensory, is a big way that a lot of girls get diagnosed, because it's not just like an irritation, it's more of like, think severe pain. Um, I'll use myself as an example. I have severe sensory with tactile. Um, so clothing is a major problem for me. There are days that it's so bad that taking a shower feels like I'm being pelted with nails. So it's not a minor irritation, it's
Hmm.
extremely painful. And frequently that's when girls are younger, they'll notice that they're having major problems with sunlight, or indoor lighting, or maybe with clothing, or maybe they don't want anyone ever touching them. So things like combing hair can be a problem. With boys, what seems to be picked up the most seems to be speech, and then the repetitive behaviors. People who are autistic or who work with autistic individuals, you'll hear them call it stimming. It's kind of a misnomer. It's actually a self-regulating behavior. So, for example, if you see a little boy sitting and playing with the car, and instead of, driving the car, they'll have it flipped over and be spinning the wheels
Hmm.
around and around and around. And that kind of calms. In fact, I have a spinner ring. So when I get anxious, I just put it on my finger and do that.
Is
It's
that
a
like
spin
those
kind of,
what do you call it? Those
it's a fidget finger
fa-
spinner. Yeah, it's a ring. So
huh.
I can do that. I can do that in a board meeting and see I'm doing it right now and nobody can see it. It's under the
Sure.
table.
Sure.
But stimming is it's basically part of autism. There's nobody who's autistic that doesn't stim in some way. They just
Okay.
might mask it or hide it because they've been taught that it's embarrassing or they should, not do that,
Or they don't want to be
which
giving a tell in a negotiation or whatever, that they're nervous or
exactly,
whatever. Yeah. I get it.
exactly, because it can be misconstrued. Exactly. It can be seen as nerves or
Mm.
lack of confidence, when in
Sure.
actuality, I frequently do that when I'm trying to work out a really hard statistical problem at work or something, because it helps me focus. So it's actually the reverse.
I think a lot of people that aren't autistic do that.
Yeah, they do. It can help you distract. Most people with ADHD do that, actually. The bouncing their leg or tapping the
Wow.
table, things like that,
Like this
or
kind of
doing
thing.
exactly
Yeah.
this kind of thing. It's a way. It's the body's way of self-regulating. It's just when you have it to the degree you do in autism, it's almost a requirement to function. So
Hmm.
it can be problematic because many people do not understand that, so they attempt to stop it
Hmm.
without realizing you're now taking away the outlet that that person had
Hmm.
to be able to re-regulate themselves, and then
Hmm.
they say that they can't self-regulate, and my comment to that is, well, they could, you took it away.
Right.
So I'm a very big proponent of, it's not a disease, it's neurodiversity. It's a neurodiverse condition. There
So we're gonna
are,
get to that.
you're going to get there, okay,
Yeah,
I will.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no. I mean, I think that's an interesting angle to it. So, first of all, this is my first question. So, before we get to that, you said the word handicap, okay, earlier in the conversation, right? So, I wasn't going to say it, but you said
Yes,
it. So, now I'm going to say it. Is autism a handicap?
it can be disabling, yes. In fact, it's one of the requirements for a diagnosis. It's tricky though. So even in me, it is a handicap when my needs are not met. So a great example, I went to the airport for business a couple years ago, and nobody likes the airport, anyway. And I had gotten cleared for, fast pass. I had my passport. I did everything I was supposed
Mm,
to try to avoid as much sensory overload as possible,
sure.
because the airport is a terrible place for someone who doesn't like to be touched and doesn't like noise. Really bad place to have to be.
Sure.
It didn't go as intended. They pulled me aside for a check. It's happened every time I travel. I'm pretty sure it's the eye contact thing, because if you don't know that I'm autistic, I look shady because I refuse to make eye contact, or I struggle to, and that can come across badly. And I told them as soon as they pulled me aside, I said, I'm more than willing to let you search, but please tell me where you're going to touch before you do. I am autistic. I was very clear. I said, I'm autistic. I have these sensory issues. If you tell me ahead of time, it's just so I can prepare myself. The lady's like, oh yeah, we're trained in that. No problem. I'm going to touch your shoulders. And then she starts here. And then she put her hands down my bra. No warning.
Hmm.
None. I collapsed on the floor. I was sobbing. I was shaking. I couldn't speak. That's called a meltdown. Most
Okay.
autists have them.
Yeah.
Many will completely lose the ability to communicate. Um, it's like fight or flight to an extreme.
Yeah.
Um,
So you're standing there. She tells you she's going to do this, right? So
mhm.
she reassures you,
Yes.
right?
That's
Removes
the
your or reduces your apprehension,
yes.
and then reintroduces it, making it way worse by the reassurance.
Exactly.
Yeah, I
And
could see
not
that. That's a problem.
like she went down my arm, she went to a very personal area on top of it.
Sure.
And then their response made it even worse, because the managers came running and security came running, like
Mm.
this woman was killing me.
Yeah.
Because if you think about the screams that you hear in a horror movie
Mm.
when someone's terrified, that's what a meltdown sounds like.
Mm.
So if you imagine me, and I'm not a small girl, I'm 6 feet tall, so I kind of stand out anyway,
Sure.
um, curled up in a ball screaming, and I can't communicate, which is
Mm.
making it worse. Now everybody's around me staring. People are touching
Sure.
me.
Yeah.
I'm just flipping out, and I feel
Sure.
trapped in my own brain. At that point, my autism is extremely disabling, because now I cannot communicate. I
Hmm.
cannot make my needs known. I can't even get up and walk away.
You
So I'm
don't know where your
completely at the
passport is. You don't like. You have a lot of issues there. Yeah.
And it gets to the point where you're
Mm.
so wrapped up and panicked, you can't come down. If you can't stop a meltdown quickly, my son, for example, I've had to take to the hospital for a sedative. It went on for 7 hours.
Mm.
If you can't figure out what the cause is and bring it down, it can become extremely bad for the person who's autistic as well as those around them. Additionally, keep in mind, this is fight or flight. Fight is in there too. So if you corner someone with autism and you injure them somehow, you may not even realize you've done it. An example that's happened recently to someone in our support group, somebody very rude, and I live in New Jersey, so rude drivers kind of
Mm.
were known for that. He was walking through the parking lot, and he's kind of off in his world, which we do that a lot. And somebody came up behind him and just laid on their horn, like as hard as they could, very long. He's very auditory sensitive. Like, he described it later as he felt like somebody was jabbing a knife through his ears. And he ran at the car because he went into fight mode. He's going to make that sound stop. So that has led to some of the myths that autistics are violent, which they're not. Um, no more so than anybody else in the population. But when you feel your life is in danger, you're going to fight. So when you get in that situation, that's where it can become very disabling. Additionally, there are people who have severe comorbid disorders that make it so that they really can't function without any help. Just being nonverbal alone can be disabling. And selective mutism is a huge issue in autism.
Selective
Um,
mutism. What's that?
Mutism.
Selective
Um,
mutism. So you choose not to
yeah,
speak.
your brain chooses not to let
Okay.
you. So if you
Okay.
see
Sure.
someone like me that can normally speak, and then something triggers and they just go completely mute. I actually work with a woman who has that issue, and it can be quite a problem in a meeting, for example. If you're presenting
Sure.
and your brain shuts off, But
I'm
luckily,
laughing. I'm laughing. I'm laughing.
no,
But
it's
you
fine. It's
understand.
fine.
You,
It is,
you,
and you imagine that scenario, it seems kind of like, wow, but things like learning disabilities are common comorbidities, especially for some reason in boys more than girls. So you might have someone who's autistic and profoundly mentally handicapped. So they're definitely suffering severe disabilities. But some recent examples have shown that just being mute doesn't mean they're not highly intelligent. In fact, there's a 9-year-old boy that just published a best-selling book for doctors, parents, and teachers on how to deal with autism, and he is a 9-year-old completely nonverbal child.
what's the name of
I
that
don't
book?
know.
Do you know the name of the book?
I need to look that up because I keep
Yeah.
forgetting. That is one of my problems is short-term memory.
Hang on one second.
I don't,
Scott, look that book up while we're recording, but also can you turn off my camera here as well? Sorry about that. So we're gonna get that book looked up. So
please
they're actually
do.
they can have very high capability, but then
Oh,
be disabled in
absolutely.
some areas. So there, that's so much better. So I could see myself on the screen, and I'm like it's like it's weird for me to see myself while I'm talking. I don't know if you
I
feel the same.
understand. I'm making myself not look over this way
Yeah,
because that's
I
where I'm over
I
there.
I think you can hide that too on yours. Um, Let me ask you this: Do scientists actually know what autism is, or we just know how to recognize the
Yeah.
symptoms?
Actually, there's been quite a few studies that have shown, I guess you could say, the effects of it. We know the cause is genetic. The problem has been there are so many genes involved that unless
So
science is
they
very,
know for sure it's genetic.
yes, and families like mine are part of the reason we've done a lot of studies, because we've got 2 autistic parents and 5 autistic children.
Mm.
You kind of got to look at it, every child I've had is autistic, and I am. My husband is, and he's my second husband. So the children from my first marriage are autistic because mom is. And the children from my second marriage, where we both are, definitely were diagnosed earlier. There were more challenges at first. Now they're doing amazing. But we've done brain scans, we've done the genetic testing, we've been part of all sorts of testing to
Hmm.
try to pinpoint. One thing they found is brain development is significantly different in utero and in early infancy between people who are autistic and people who aren't. And the study was large enough that I feel fairly comfortable with the results because there were quite a few participants. But what they found, for example, the gray, how they talk about the gray matter in your brain? You've got the
Sure.
gray matter and then you got the white matter. There's 2 different ones in there. When you're really little, that gray matter starts to go away that's not being used. So you're born with every connection imaginable. You could learn any language, you could learn anything at birth. By 2 years old, for example, the languages you haven't learned have been pruned away because you're not using them. It's kind of a use it or lose it situation. That's why they say that time in childhood is so important. In autistic children, that pruning isn't happening. So their brains become too big, basically. So one way that they've initially started seeing it was at birth, the head circumference was on the normal side, but by 2 years old, their head circumference was much larger. And it can lead to problems physically, such as, for example, my son has something called a Chiari-1 malformation. His brain doesn't fit in his skull. So his brain stem is in his spinal column. So they had to remove part of his skull to relieve the pressure
Whew.
because there's just too much brain matter in there. Yeah, it's kind of a horrible thing to think of, especially when he was only 4.
Oh my
But
goodness.
but
Okay.
it made a huge difference in his life because he was in constant pain. At that point, he was nonverbal, and he started speaking within 3 months after that surgery. So we think pain had a lot to do with it. You can't learn when you're in agony. You can't. So once the pain was gone, he was able to start really learning. He ended up catching up. Now he's a straight A student. He's a sophomore in high
Oh,
school.
thank
He's learning
God.
his marching band.
Thank God for
Yeah,
that.
he's a DJ too, so writes his own music. He came from completely nonverbal and in constant pain to where he is now.
Wow.
So, it makes a difference. If you're not hurting, you can really go far.
I think Scott has some news for us. What's that, Scott? You got that book?
I have 3.
Okay, there's 3.
Yeah.
There's 3.
Apparently, this is a popular outlet. So I've got Diego
Yeah.
Pena. Does that ring a bell?
Yes, that
Okay.
one does.
There's also Milan Bonilla Cruz wrote Autism in Me. And then there's The Reason I Jump, which is another nonverbal autistic boy. And his name, sorry, Amazon link, Naoki Higashida.
Japanese.
I'll have to read those other 2. I hadn't heard of those
There you
before,
go.
but it is an extremely popular outlet with the advent of all the computer programs and things that we have, and computers and handhelds are so commonplace now that people who used to not be able to communicate can easily do so. And that's led to, first of all, some amazing talent being seen, but also, unfortunately, people coming to the realization that nonverbal doesn't mean not intelligent. So all those comments that were made, they heard all of it. So they have a lot of, emotional, psychiatric issues now because they've been listening to people talk over them for how many years about how hard and difficult life is because of who they are. And that would mess anybody up,
So the this is maybe a tougher question, and I want to ask it. It's I'm interested. I just want to make sure I walk this road correctly. Are the label? Is it helpful to be diagnosed? Is it always helpful to be diagnosed, or is it maybe better for some maybe high functioning autistics just not to know and move forward? Like, I mean, obviously there are people that are severely disabled by autism, but you said it's a spectrum.
It is definitely a spectrum, and actually a large majority fall in the higher end. So they're verbal, they can work, they can function. It's the ones that have multiple disabilities going on that really struggle. But it's not the autism itself that's necessarily causing that struggle. It's just one more piece of the struggle for them. So, for example, when you see the children, and it is horrendous to see, you see the children who are really struggling, in the ads when they're raising money, etc. Those children absolutely exist and they absolutely need treatment and care, but that's not representing the majority of them. That's, but you don't represent the majority of anything when you're trying to raise money for a specific purpose. You always show the worst case scenario. But that's unfortunately led to some myths, which your question is a really good one on that. So my answer to that is I do think it is extremely helpful, and I can explain why. The way the world is now, you don't necessarily get your needs met if you don't have that label. The ideal world would be it doesn't matter who you are, you're accepted because you're a human being and you deserve to be. And if you're sensitive to light, then your boss lets you sit somewhere that doesn't have it. If you're sensitive to sound, you're allowed to wear earphones. Where the world is accepting of those differences, then it wouldn't matter if you're labeled or not because you're going to get your needs met. But unfortunately, the way it is now, the only way to get your needs met is to have the label. For those who are high functioning, which I don't like that label either, but people understand it, so I use it.
It makes sense. I can see why it's a sensitive one.
Yeah, well, and a real brief explanation is high functioning, low functioning has nothing to do with how I experience my autism. It has everything to do with how you experience my autism. So it could change. If I'm having a meltdown in the airport, I'm now low functioning to them. If I'm presenting at a board meeting at work, I'm high functioning to them, but I may be having a terrible sensory day and in really bad pain and just muddling through. So it has nothing to do with how I'm doing or my capabilities. So what it does is it makes it so that The suffering of the high functioning people is not respected, and the abilities of the lower functioning people aren't respected either. So it's kind of I know we have to have a term, but I'm hoping that we can find better ones. But for now, I use them too because it's what people know.
Mm.
But so the people who are high functioning, who maybe either they know and they hide it or they don't know, they've found there's an extremely high risk involved with that. What they're doing is called masking. So you're pretending to be someone else. You're pretending to be what we call neurotypical, normal, if there is such a thing. You're pretending, though, to be like everyone else. That comes at a very steep price, aside from being exhausting, because when you're talking about masking for someone who's autistic, I have to manage my voice tone, my body language, my facial expressions, my eye contact, what I'm thinking, what I'm saying, on top of trying to have a normal conversation with someone.
Mm.
That's exhausting. I used to do it. When I was in my 20s, all I wanted was to fit in because I never did. And I thought if I pretended to be normal, I would. All it did was make it so that by 6 o'clock, I was passed out on the couch. I was so tired. Aside from being physically exhausting and mentally exhausting, it takes a severe mental health toll. And there are studies now that are showing this. First of all, one of the leading causes of death in autism is suicide. And the average life expectancy for someone with autism, despite there being no physical problems, so you don't have a heart condition, you don't have a stomach problem, the life expectancy is 55 years because they're killing themselves. They've linked that to masking. The higher functioning you are, the more likely you will be to attempt or commit suicide. Because think of it this way, if I'm going out all day as this one person, nobody ever knows who I am. So your brain ends up split. You have the real you, who now feels completely non-valuable, feels like somebody nobody would like. So you hide that person, and you're not meeting any of those needs at all. And you're focusing on being this person who doesn't even really exist. And that's the only person anybody knows, and that's the only person people like. So now you also live in fear that your mask will slip. So in support groups, you hear that a lot. Oh my gosh, what do I do? My mask slipped at work today. And now people are asking questions. All of that causes severe mental health problems. So masking is actually being found to be dangerous and
I,
very bad.
so here, I'm listening to you, and you're talking about this spectrum, right?
Yeah.
And I guess at one end would be Asperger's, would be at the
Yep.
high end, right? Those,
And
and
PDD
then
and OS would be up there too. Yeah.
okay, and then at the other end are people that have multiple types, the ADHD with autism and something else, right? That's what, and maybe they
Usually
can't.
the other end, ADHD is pretty across the board
Okay,
actually. Most
okay,
of us are very ADHD or ADD. The other end would be severe learning disabilities,
okay,
severe physical problems, severe seizure disorders are very common. Severe mental health issues such as schizophrenia are common as well. The most common issues that are comorbid with autism that you'll see on all ends: depression, anxiety, and stomach issues. No idea why. That's where all the diets came from.
mm,
We tried them in our family. All it did was make my kids really angry because I took away all the stuff they liked for stuff that tastes like sand.
yeah,
Um, and they don't have a gluten or casein sensitivity. We did it for an entire year. I say it made their behavior worse because now I'm dealing with meltdowns at the dinner table too.
yeah, sure.
So, and most people it's not an allergy, but sometimes people get desperate for an answer and they want to know what caused their child's autism, and they can't accept that genetics caused it and that it's not that their child is broken, their child is different. And those differences can be extremely positive. You just have to provide the supports. There's actually quite a few actors and actresses and artists who are autistic.
Hmm.
And like, for example, if you like your Apple products, Steve Jobs was autistic.
Steve Jobs is autistic. Okay.
Yes. Dan Aykroyd is autistic. Tim Burton is autistic. Daryl
Okay.
Hannah is autistic. If you do the post-mortem studies, which I think most people can agree that Einstein definitely was autistic.
Okay.
I've got some social stories for him that make that really clear. Like telling off the Queen of England, usually
Hmm.
not a good idea because she's too loud. Um, just things like that, or just like his friendships and how he couldn't keep friends and he couldn't keep a relationship. And people always said he was just so strange and would talk to himself all the time and repeat what people said. And so groups of psychologists got together and they're like, yeah, I think he's the poster child for it.
Wow.
But even
Int-
going further back, it's been seen throughout generations. It's just we labeled it differently in the past.
hmm.
So, now it's being called what it is, but it used to be you were just eccentric or you were a loner, you were just strange. The strange old lady living on the outskirts of town that everybody thought was really weird. Maybe she was autistic, or maybe she just didn't like people. That happens too.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to ask you, uh, do you think that this spectrum that you talk about doesn't really end, but that after you pass sort of the high functioning or the Asperger's, everybody's kind of on the same spectrum. It's just autism is one end of it.
I actually think autism is, if we're thinking of all of the human race on
Yeah.
a spectrum of functioning, autism is kind of broken up in that way then. So you're going to have people with severe comorbidities in the same area as people with severe mental handicaps, people with severe physical handicaps that maybe are not able to function at all on their own. And then you're going to have the people with Asperger's, PDD, NOS, which I know they don't technically call it that anymore, but some of us are hoping they bring it back because it's less confusing.
Mm.
But they are on the higher end of functioning. And in fact, a lot of the studies that have been done in the last 15 years have started showing that there's some evolutionary benefit to having Asperger's, to having autism. Like, for example, studies are starting to show that people can die from loneliness. And in our society where people are becoming more and more cut off, it's happening more. You don't find that in autism because most of us are perfectly content to hang out with ourselves most of the time.
Mm.
We don't want friends, and it's not that we don't experience loneliness because we absolutely do. But we are not uncomfortable with being on our own either,
Mm.
if that makes sense. So that social need that was bred into us over generations because it was survival is not as strong.
Mm.
Plus, our brains are wired towards technology and science because for some reason it seems to be uneven the way that things develop. So although social or language might be, and I say might because then you got some brilliant linguists out there too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Although they, tend towards this, that's where you get we'll say the stereotype of the science, the guy in the lab coat or the geek with the computers all around him or things like
That's why
that.
I'm thinking like this spectrum is maybe more diverse or broader than we like in your bio. You
Mhm.
use the word, I circled it here. I circled a bunch of things. Neurodiversity.
Yes, I absolutely believe that autism is just one of many forms of neurodiverse development. ADHD is one of them too. These can be disabling, but when you really look at the disability side of it, most of the disability is either caused or made much worse by a lack of respect. It's a lack of respect of the person's needs and limits. And we run into it. My company is absolutely amazing, but even there, we do run into managers because I coach a lot of autistic individuals at work. We do run into managers who they just refuse to accept that, if you would allow this one minor change, their entire way of working would be so much better and they wouldn't be in pain. And we can't get them to do it without going through HR, which that shouldn't be necessary for an extremely small change. But if they were in a wheelchair or they were hearing impaired or had a physical or obvious disability, there would be no fight. They wouldn't tell somebody in a wheelchair, you can't work here, you have to work from home because we're not putting a ramp in for you. But they will tell someone with autism, you have to work from home because we are not going to allow you to sit in the corner where it's quieter.
But he just wants to. Can I play devil's advocate?
Absolutely.
Because I respect I understand completely where you're coming from, but I also want to make this an interesting podcast. So, I have a feeling that people, when in these situations, I'm a business owner, and I think it's very difficult for people to distinguish non-autistic people that don't have autism in their families, people that are unfamiliar with the things, or just they hear the word. Like autism is kind of like, here's a funny one. I might double whammy you here. Autism is kind of like feminism. A lot of people say it, but it doesn't seem to be agreement about what it actually is to the average person. Right. Like every woman's a feminist, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Every woman say, "I'm a feminist," right? But then on that spectrum, there's another spectrum, right? You could have pro-life, pro-choice, in
the middle.
Yeah, women that believe that men and women are locked into an interminable struggle forever. And then you have people on they're all calling themselves feminists, right? So,
right, but there's no agreement on what that ever meant.
Yeah, well, what does it actually mean to you? What does it mean to us? What does it mean in this environment? So, let's playing devil's advocate here. It's like Jimmy's special. Jimmy needs the corner office because he can't handle a little bit of background music while he's working. Oh yeah, Jimmy's special. Yeah. I think that and not to be, that's insensitive, but at the same time, I understand where it comes from. It's
lack of education. It's lack of knowledge. It's all it is. Because
I think it's also people abusing the system too, like non-autistic people, maybe.
Yes, they do. That's why, for example, where I work, I have to get accommodations approved by my doctor. So you have to go through a whole process to get even the smallest accommodation. And that includes with physical. It's not like they're singling us out necessarily. But at the same time, part of the problem is, first of all, people don't understand autism. And what they do understand is usually about children. So when you're talking about, like in my case, the data scientist sitting next to you, the last thing you would think is they're autistic. The field that I'm in, I can be as weird as I want to be and nobody's going to think anything of it because I'm working with IT and I'm working with, people in science labs. I'm allowed to be strange, I can get away with it. But at the same time, the accommodations are vital for me to do what I've done. And I actually, in my own life, have that parallel. So I have my life before. So when I knew I was autistic, but I didn't know what to do with the information, I was scared of it. I was diagnosed.
Ashamed of it, maybe? Were you ashamed of it at all?
That's what was weird. It was a catch because I was telling my children at the same time that I'm feeling embarrassed or scared of it. It was really an unusual feeling. It wasn't shame per se, but it kind of was. There was a little of it there. I think a lot of it was fear. I already wasn't accepted, and now I know why I wasn't accepted. But
You're accepted on the Get a Grip on Life podcast anytime you want.
But so I'm raising my kids to be proud of who they are and not to be ashamed and not to hide it and to self-advocate. That is the number one thing I keep telling parents, because I'm getting these 24 and 25-year-olds in a professional job with a doctorate who don't know how to self-advocate for their own needs because their parents have hovered their whole lives and not taught them.
You're getting exactly where I want to what I want to ask you about. Okay.
Okay.
So, like, even as an employer or as a parent with an autistic kid, okay, and that's why I asked you earlier about the idea of the label, if it's helpful or not, you know. And what I'm wondering is, how do parents or how do bosses, like, like a simple tactic or something? I don't know if there's anything simple with autism, but it doesn't sound simple. But the like, how do you balance the idea of, allowing for advocation, making accommodations for the worker, for the person, but also as a parent or as someone who's caring or as a boss that's looking for results? Because we're all looking at the end of the day in a corporation, you're looking for results.
In business, you got to have results, right?
Right. So how do you avoid the crutch problem?
Well, that's a big question, and we've dealt with that because, believe it or not, you'll have one of two things happen if you're a parent with a child that's autistic. Either you are going to fight tooth and nail for the smallest accommodation, or you're going to fight tooth and nail to get them to let go and let your kid breathe a little bit. And I've had both, because it depends not only on the school, but the teacher.
Sure.
So one year could be great, the next year maybe not. Sometimes you just have to prove it to them, because for some reason, I'm not the expert in my own kids. I always love that. So in my mind, it is very unique to each child, just like parenting any child would be. And with 5 kids, believe me, I've seen, my youngest one doesn't stand a chance. I've seen it all at this point. She doesn't get away with anything. Her siblings have already tried it.
Sure.
But it depends on the child. So, for example, my oldest one really did need more supports initially educationally, because her auditory processing delay was so significant. Like, for example, if she was sitting in class taking notes, let's say, by the time she finished writing down the first thing the teacher said, he's on the 5th thing. Like, her brain was that slow to pick it up that she's missing these huge gaps, and her grades are suffering. So in that case, she needed an accommodation, which I didn't want it to be, oh, here's my notes for the day. That's easy. She still has to learn. She still has to work around this. So at first, I had her get the notes from the teacher and give them to me, and also audio record the teacher, so that she could listen to it again and again, rather than having to focus on writing it down, so she could actually absorb what she's hearing rather than trying to scramble and write the notes down, because her brain is just not going to keep up.
You know what? I'll tell you this. You know what's interesting? That's actually good advice for people without autism too.
Yes.
Like, sometimes some people are note takers and some people aren't note takers.
I am definitely a note taker. Like, mine are color-coded, labeled, because I like very orderly. But I don't have a severe auditory processing delay. Mine is very small, of maybe a half a second or two. It's not several seconds long. And if you think about several seconds of delay, that can really be debilitating. So my idea of how to know what to give your child, so you're not a helicopter parent, so you're not doing it all for them, and so you're not putting in a position so they're going to fail.
Yeah, it's complicated, man. It's tough.
It really is. You got to look at it as, what do I need to do to level the playing field? So what do I need to do to bring my child up to the same level as their peers? So in her case, it was helping her find a way around the note-taking issue. With my son, who has really bad sensory issues, and his are a little unusual, he's sensory seeking. instead of being sensory sensitive. So you can be either one. Yeah, autism is definitely complicated. So he needs that break to go take a walk, just or to jump up and down to get that feedback. And just simply by letting him take a 2-minute walk when he starts getting really overwhelmed, he's now at the level of his peers. Just something that simple. That same child, though, we ran into this past year where the school district forced us to give him an aid. He'd never had one. He's a freshman in high school now. They're trying to put him in special ed. They're trying to give him an aid because he's autistic and he needs it. That's the example of the other side.
Well, that's the one size fits all approach.
Yeah.
So I've never done this before. Okay, so I got like 10 questions for you after my original questions. Okay, but I want to jump on one right now because I love this topic. I don't love the topic. I'm learning so much from you. Is the better way to put it. So I have 4 children. Okay, and
the noise level.
Yes, I know the noise level. None of them have been diagnosed with autism, but there's a couple kids at their school that are autistic, and for whatever reason at that school, there seems to have been a few different kids that were autistic. And from looking at the teachers and looking at the children, and listening to the parents, and some of the parents would we're friends with them, and they would talk to us, and I would just listen because I'm not wading in. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not going to take sides there, or, it's
it
not.
It can be really tricky.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer to the questions. I'm listening. You know what I'm saying? And I can't do this. I can't start questioning them because you're coming on the show to be asked about autism, which is different than someone who's unloading their frustrations.
Oh, absolutely. And I probably wouldn't have done this when my kids were little. I was still learning, and I was still trying to figure out what to do.
Imagine someone's at a school frustrated, their autistic kid is having trouble, and you turn to them and say, well, how do we deal with the crutch versus accommodation? No, they're not going to want to hear that.
I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, exactly. But I find that
question can cause rifts in support groups. I've seen support groups divide into 2 new groups because of the difference in opinion.
Sure, yeah.
So it is very challenging.
Yes, for sure. So teachers, there's a lot of pressure on the education system right now. There's a lot of pressure. And I sympathize with the parents, but I also sympathize with the teachers that have sometimes, 20, 30 kids in their class. It's funny because it's interesting because being a teacher falls on both ends of the most stressful job spectrum. Okay? Yes. So if you're a high school teacher, you have one of the least stressful jobs according to national statistics. Yeah. If you're a grade school teacher under grade 5, you have one of the highest stress jobs on this Bureau of Labor Statistics.
So I'm not sure if I agree. But yeah, no, my family were mostly teachers on the whole range of it. So I can say on both ends, yeah, I've seen the stress, and
But do you sympathize with the teachers? Like, do you step back and say, gosh, it must be really difficult. She's got, 18 kids in the class. 2 of them are autistic. One of them's got a special accommodation, and the school board offers no help for her in her classroom, and it's a grade 2 class.
Absolutely. And that's my way of handling it has been, first of all, I'm very open and honest with them about my kids, both the pluses and the minuses. It's not fair to a child or anyone to only focus on one or the other. And there's a tendency to do that. So when you have a child who's diagnosed with autism, unfortunately, the tendency actually tends to be on, this is everything that's going to drive you crazy about my child. First of all, the kid's hearing you. Is that really what you want to teach them? Second thing is, though, it's those positives that the teacher can use to offset the negatives. So, for example, I could have gone in when Matthew was in 3rd grade, that's one of my kids, and said, he really has a problem with obsessions. Like trains, fire trucks, that's all he'll talk about. It's all he thinks about. He'll make the noises all day long. Or the way I did it was I said, okay, sometimes Matthew gets really frustrated and wants to retreat to his own world. A really great way to engage him is to use trains as an example. For example, if you're teaching math, you can say, you have 5 train tracks and 2 tunnels. How can you divide this up so that they can go through without hitting each other? His teachers loved that because I gave them a solution rather than just throwing a problem at them.
Mm.
And I think all parents should be doing this because all of our kids are unique. They all have motivators.
Mm.
I've told them before, you want to motivate Matthew to learn when he was real little, put him on a swing. They looked at me like I was nuts. I'm like, watch. He was just learning his addition tables and they couldn't get him to do it. And I put him on a swing. I started pushing him and then he started going on his own. And I started asking him, and just like this, he's rattling them off. Said he needs a distraction for his body. It doesn't have to be a swing, but give him something to do and ask him. Give him some Play-Doh. Give him some crayons. Keep his physical body busy so his mind can work. And then he excelled. Morgan, it was, you've got to be cautious who you group her with because she is one of the types she used to be. She's a completely different kid now that she hit high school, but very withdrawn, would never speak up, she knew the answers, but she would never volunteer them. And kids tended, rather than bullying her, they tended to mother her. You know what I mean? She was little
I
tiny
don't.
girl.
Oh, okay. Like take care of her.
Blue-eyed. They would take care of her and soothe her, protect her rather than letting her explore. So by putting her in charge of certain topics in certain classes, they were her life. Science is her thing. By putting her as the lead of a group rather than letting her get pulled into a group and then taken care of and coddled because then she's not learning anything, making her be the one to select the group and she's in charge of it. And it was like night and day. She went from not being able to work in groups, not being able to collaborate to, she does stand-up comedy. So completely different child. She just had to slowly be trained to do it. But there are exceptions to that. If something causes them pain, leave it alone. Don't make it keep happening. Because parents have a tendency to want their kids to have the best. That's normal. It's like, I'm not going to take Morgan to a very loud venue.
Mm-hmm.
For example, we live right outside New York City. I don't take her with us. Unless she asks to go, I tell her we're going. I tell her what we're doing. I don't ask her. I don't pressure her because she can't stand the way the noise is echoing through the city. It hurts her very badly. I don't see the point in hurting her. There's absolutely no reason, just because the family wants to go to the museum in New York, that I should forcibly drag her along and put her through that agony that's going to take days to recover from. She does, however, have to learn to navigate basic daily life skills. So she does go to the grocery store. She does go to areas that might be a little uncomfortable so she can get used to them. And I teach her techniques to deal with it. But when you're talking something that's not necessary, you really got to weigh, does she ever really have to go to New York? Really? No. When she's an adult, does she have to live in New York? No. Go get a job in, the middle of Montana where there's no people.
Sure.
It's
for sure.
to that. Or, just it's all about, in my mind, it's about respecting their abilities and their boundaries. And I think in general, we have a problem as a society doing that for children in general. A lot of people don't realize just how smart and amazing children are.
Mm-hmm.
But we also don't respect their needs and limits when we would do the same for ourselves. So, for example, in our house, I've never put very tight rules on you can only eat at these times, partially because I've got grazers and then I've got my 3 meals a day kids. Well, it's not fair to the grazers if I say you can only eat at these 3 times. If I'm hungry at 11 o'clock at night, I'm going to come get a snack. Why should my child have to stay hungry just because they're a child and I'm an adult? So it's kind of along those lines of just respecting that they're unique and that's a good thing, and help the people help them. And if you're teaching them to self-advocate for, so when they're having a meltdown, talk to them about what caused it. Help them identify their sensory needs. Help them identify their executive functioning weaknesses or their social skills weaknesses. Because if you pretend like they're not there, they're just going to keep hurting the kid over and over throughout their lives, and they're never going to be able to find a way to work within their limits, because you're telling them they have no limits, but they keep hitting these walls, and then they're going to feel like they failed.
Hmm.
So being honest with them about, okay, look, you struggle with sensory issues with your clothing. Why don't we try shopping this way? And this is how I have to go shopping. I don't look at the styles. I feel the fabric first. Because I don't care how cute it is. If it hurts, it's not coming home with me. There is no point to continue looking. And my daughter shops the same way. She's very much about, okay, how does this feel? My son could wear anything. I could put thorns on him. I don't think he'd notice. So it's about the individuality, and with the teachers in particular, stop making their jobs harder. Tell them how to work with your child, not just, oh,
Okay,
this, and
that's
this
a
is wrong.
perfect segue to my next question.
Mhm.
Would it be helpful if, or maybe there's two questions here.
Mhm.
Would kids with autism be more comfortable in an all autistic school, and would that help them more?
It depends. So they do exist. There's quite a few of
Oh,
them.
okay.
Several right here in New Jersey, actually. So there are pluses and minuses. The plus, obviously, being the teachers are very well trained in autism, you would hope. I say that because there's been some news articles recently of kids being abused by their teachers. But you're going to get that in any career, unfortunately, because there are people like that out there. They just are. But those schools are absolutely terrific for the kids, especially who have higher needs, um, that have maybe more struggles. The problem is when you get to the kids who are at that higher end, where yes, they probably have anxiety. I think it's very rare not to have anxiety and autism. They're very verbal. They're very capable in the classroom. They're maybe not. They're not. They don't have poor social skills, but they're maybe socially awkward, if you know what I mean. Because those schools, unfortunately, can't provide the extracurricular activities that the other schools can. So, like, my son is all about marching band. Like, he is looking forward to 2 straight weeks on the pavement in the middle of August,
Okay.
marching around out there. And I get it because I'm a marching band geek too.
Okay.
But he wouldn't get that ability to do that if he didn't go to the typical school. Even though there are 2 schools within 15 minutes of us that are autism only. And they do the whole range. The other problem that I've seen with those schools is that it's harming the other kids too. Autism brings some very unique perspectives. You can't rewire the brain and have them think the same way as everybody else. And I feel like that discourse with people who have very different views, especially when you're in high school, is really important. That's
But
how you learn.
devil's advocate here again,
Yeah,
just
go
to
ahead.
say, um, uh, should or do parents with kids that have maybe some more severe symptoms
Mhm.
have the right to have their children in a regular class and proceed through the grades with the people their age?
They do.
Is that
A lot of,
wise? Is that the right choice?
I think that's a complicated one. Let's say we're talking just autism, no major medical problems.
Okay.
Because if you're talking physical disabilities that require a lot of equipment, it might not be safe
All
to
right.
do that. So let's say someone who's got a nonverbal autistic child. Um, It really depends. So, and this
The
is what's
question
so
is, should they or do they have the right?
they have the right to, absolutely. And I think they should, only because I feel like nobody knows a child better than the parent. So, for
That's
example,
not
when
always true.
most parents do know their kids better. Not
I
unfortunately,
would
you
say that most parents do know what's best for their kids, but most parents know their kids better, but that doesn't mean they know what's best. And the other thing I
oh,
think
that's
is,
great. I misspoke. I kind of meant they know better than the teacher that's never met them. What?
I think sometimes yes and sometimes no. I wouldn't say that's a universal statement. I wouldn't say that the parents of autistic children know better than, maybe the teachers
That's
know.
not always true,
Yeah.
absolutely, because I've seen
And there's
they
like
do have
this
some.
butting of heads. Can I actually, from there, let me get into another question. I is there do parents that don't have autism say so? I think it's interesting that you have the symptoms of autism. You've been diagnosed. You've accepted it as an adult, which you said
Mhm.
was a challenge for you, right? To be able to accept
Very
it,
much.
right?
Yes,
So
and
you've
I
gone
think it's harder as an adult because you've gone your whole life,
in
and then
denial.
this
Yeah,
happens, and it changes how you view everything. It really does,
sure.
because you finally can research something. There's
Yes,
a name.
you can look for answers a lot
Exactly, and
easier. Yeah,
tips and tricks on how to handle different things, and then you start to realize you're not alone. That's the big one.
I wonder though. I wonder if parents that don't have autism, who have
Mhm.
children with autism, is there any struggle with guilt or shame or something like that going on with them that needs to be dealt with separately on their own?
Oh, absolutely. And unfortunately, a lot of times it's not dealt with on their own. So, what we see in the autism community is essentially divisions. And it bothers me because we all have the same goal, which is the best life possible for ourselves and our kids. I mean, that's ultimately the goal, whether you're a parent who, like me, is saying, be out there, be proud of who you are, be strong in who you are, respect your needs and your boundaries.
But
And
get
the
out
parent
into
that
the world.
says,
But get out into the world.
right, exactly, don't shelter. I'm not, I may introduce them slowly, but I don't hide them.
Mm.
Even though people used to tell me to, like if Matthew had a meltdown, I'd be told, well, you shouldn't be bringing him out in public. And I'm like, well, then how else is he going to learn to be out in public if I don't
Yes, for sure.
bring? But then you have the parents who their focus is normalize, hide, fix, cure. And a lot of guilt is behind that because they either don't understand or don't accept the reason that autism occurs. And I know you've heard a lot of the reasons in the news. You've heard the vaccine argument. There's the brain injury argument. There's the cold parenting argument where they're blaming the mother's parenting when they're infants,
Mm.
saying that that's why they're autistic. There's all sorts of arguments from people. There's the dietary, it's an allergy, a lot of that is guilt, shame, and fear.
Hmm.
And it's because it's just like when you hear people who are suing over a death that happened, and you look at the case and you go, it was random.
It's an
They
accident.
got the disease, it
Yeah.
was random, it was in
Yeah.
their genes. There's no one to blame. But they have to blame someone because they're scared, they're angry, they're
Sure.
hurt.
Sure.
And I won't lie, I went through that when my kids were diagnosed. I mourned the child I thought I was carrying, if
Mm.
that makes
I totally sense. It's interesting. My brother has a Down syndrome child, and
sense.
it was interesting because he would tell you that he had to grieve the son he didn't have
Yes,
in
to
order to
accept the
love
one
and
he got.
accept the one he had. Because in your head,
Yeah,
he's like, I'm going to take him to hockey. I'm going to do, not that they can't play hockey. Down syndrome kids can play hockey, but it's not, he had to let go of
it's
that.
not as easy. It's
Yeah.
not clear anymore. You've got this fuzzy, dark
Yes.
path in front of you. And that was it for me too. I was thinking, oh, for my girls, I'm gonna take them to get their nails done and we're gonna do all this girly stuff. My boys, I'm gonna be able to coach their soccer team. Yeah, I'm
Sure.
kind of both ways. So I'm like, I can be girly or I can be
Sure.
boy. whatever. So I'm all excited about, we're going to do scouts and we're going to go camping, we're going to do this and we're going to travel. And none of that happened except the soccer. That one did happen because my oldest son is an amazing soccer player, but he even played in college for a little bit.
Oh,
But
wow.
it took too much of his life. It's either soccer or everything else when you're in college. And he was like, I'm not doing this for a career. I want to experience more. So he doesn't do that anymore. But my son Matthew, I think, was the hardest because he struggled the most. He was nonverbal till he was 5.
Oof.
He was obviously suffering, and that really hurt me as
Mm,
a mom to see him in pain because
mm,
you want to fix it, you want to help it.
mm,
Luckily for him, he was the 4th. So I'd already gone through the acceptance process. By the time I got to the 4th one, I'm just like, he's autistic, isn't he? Like, I kind of knew from infancy that something was different with him because he
mm.
struggled so much more. Um, it was really hard, but I think a lot of my mourning was mourning the ease of the life he would have had, knowing he's going to have to fight the battles I fought, that he's going to have to suffer the way I did. And the problem that I have with it is he wouldn't have had to if people were kinder. Most of the suffering I went through was due to other people's cruelty. It's the same with my kids.
I think
When my
all suffering, I would say, is either other people's cruelty or cruelty to yourself.
Yes, very true. That is very true. But like the bullying growing up, not being accepted by my own family.
Mm.
Now, there was one exception in my family, but I only still have contact with one family member.
Oh, that's sad.
I didn't fit in, and it didn't help that I was also adopted. So I'm
Mm.
like 0 for 2 on parents. Except for, I will say, my father, I still talk to him. He's still very supportive, although I'm not sure he supports that I'm autistic. I think he has trouble accepting that, which is a generational thing I'm seeing too. The older generation has a really hard time accepting it if it's not severe. I've noticed, like, I'm talking 80s and
Yeah,
90s. I'm
sure,
not,
sure, sure.
but
The let me tell you a little anecdote here. So I was talking to a friend, and she's an old friend, and she was telling me about her teenage daughter. And her teenage daughter was going through a rebellious period of her life and was really upset and spending too much time on the device and all this sort of stuff. And she was just kind of I believe it or not, people tell me stuff. I don't know why. That's why I started a podcast.
like in the grocery store, someone will give me their life story because I said hi.
Yeah. So I mean I enjoy it. I
I
enjoy
did
it.
too. You meet really cool people that way.
For sure. So she was telling me, and then she said to me that, I think her reason for her behavior is that a couple years ago, I was going through some old stuff, and it was some paintings and drawings that she had done, and I separated, just the ones that were special to me, and I put them in another box, and then I got rid of all these other drawings, and then she found them in the garbage, and that's why I think her behavior is so rotten now. And I looked at her and I said,
Hmm.
really? You're feeling too much guilt and shame. You're looking for explanations that aren't there. You
Yeah.
know, sometimes
Well,
teenagers are really, really rebellious. Sometimes you have a kid with autism,
yes.
right? It's
Or
like,
whatever else it is. Everybody has something. That's what I always try to tell people. Everybody has a struggle.
mm,
Whether it's disabling or not,
yeah, that's a
it's
different
still a
story.
struggle and it's
But
still painful to you,
beating
regardless.
yourself up over it, or think
Right.
there's something actually. You know what's interesting, and maybe this is going to sound rotten, but there's almost something narcissistic or egotistical in staying in a place where you're blaming yourself.
Yes.
It's selfish in a way.
It's
Like
too,
you're indulging yourself in your
yes,
own
it's too
grief or something.
comfortable. It's
Yes,
too hard to take that next step. That next
to
step
accept
out of
it
it.
and move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that next step is like jumping off a cliff. You
A-
don't know. scared.
Is that what the arguments in the autism community is about? Is it people kind of stuck in that
Yeah.
guilt and shame place? People transitioning
And
through
anger.
that? Yeah.
Oh,
Anger,
and when
yeah.
they're angry, they attack us. So we'll try to help with understanding what their child is going through
Hmm.
as an autistic individual, trying to say, you know what, it could be this. You know, hey, my son went through this, or I personally dealt with this, and this was why.
Mm.
And they will attack us with such venom that I can't understand it and
Mm.
say, we have no idea what autism feels like. Like, what?
Mm.
And you do. You know exactly how it feels, right? Well, yes, because I'm his mom. But you're not autistic. No. Well, then how do you know what autism feels like?
Sure.
And they want to work towards fixing, curing, normalizing, which is where these really bad therapies are coming from, because it'll make them feel less guilty. Because deep down inside, I think they know it was genetic and there's nothing anybody could have done, but they still feel like they should have been able to do something. I've even heard them say it would have been better if their child hadn't been born
Mm.
because of their genes. And I was like, do you realize what you're saying?
Mm.
This is a valuable person. They deserve to exist, and just because they exist in a way that wasn't the perfect way you hoped for,
Mm.
even
Yeah,
if you
they
have a
have to grieve it. They have to grieve it.
they do, but they refuse to grieve it. They instead get stuck in the blame.
Mm.
And
And the
if they're
shame.
not blaming themselves,
Blame comes from shame.
it does. Shame, and I think not understanding is too.
You know,
In this in this case,
I think, it's interesting. This is my next point. I've crossed a lot off because you've covered a lot. Oh, I can't uncross. That's my last one. I got to ask you. So I got a couple more if I could. I know
sure.
we've already spoke for an hour and 15 minutes, so I don't if I have that much time. I can probably do another 15 or so if you don't mind.
I'm I made sure I cleared my schedule this
Okay,
afternoon.
good.
So
Okay, I don't know which one first. Let's do this one. Okay. So it's going to take me a little bit of time to kind of work my way through this. Okay. Now, the indicator of IQ, probably a sensitive topic in the autism community, right? I would assume, right? Because
yeah.
autistic children probably have low IQ scores or whatever. I'm not a big believer in IQ I think that it's a very rough metric. I think it does indicate something, but I think it
Mhm.
indicates it's probably skewed like in to people that are good at passing tests.
Yeah.
Does that make
Very much.
sense?
Yes. And
Right?
actually that's something I had the pleasure of studying because my initial degree was in psychology because I
Mm.
was interested in research. So testing was something I really wanted to understand more, and it
Well they
absolutely
say that. Let me say this. So they have these these statistics that correlate to
Mhm.
IQ, but if all the tests are done in a way to move things towards somebody that's of a certain type of intelligence, then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, okay? And then the rewards will come and so on and so forth. So but what they're noticing is that people with higher IQs are marrying people with higher IQs. Okay? So this is a new thing. So in the past, a doctor would marry a nurse. Okay, not that
Yeah.
nurses have oh look out, I'm in big trouble now, but
Yeah, no.
or a boss would marry his secretary. But now what's happening is nurses are marrying other nurses, and doctors are marrying other doctors, and executives are marrying other executives, and so these people that have been bred in this path with this same type of genetic material, and they're noticing that people that are wealthier and higher IQ have more autistic kids.
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
here's the question: is autism? This is where it comes down. This is what this article was talking about. Is
Mhm.
it correlated? Is it a response to the way that humans are mating? And I hate to use that word, but in the way that they're
Yeah, I know.
pairing up, they're pairing up, and
Okay.
people that didn't pair up in the past are now pairing up.
Right.
Or is it because people who are wealthy are more likely to have kids that are diagnosed?
That definitely used to be the case. Now that you've got it in pretty much across the schools, I can't speak for all countries, obviously, but the ones I'm familiar with, teachers and principals and people in the schools are now very good at recognizing symptoms. So they're able to call it out. So income has now kind of lessened. I won't say it's gone away because I don't think it ever will. I do think you make a really interesting point. So the pairing up, part of the reason I don't think we used to see it the way we did is because women weren't in those positions before. So autistic women were not doctors yet because they just weren't, but now they are. They weren't scientists, but now they are. So now you have two people that carry potentially that genetics for autism. And if you have one parent that's autistic, you have a 75% chance of having a child with autism. If you have two parents that are autistic, well, come over to my house and I'll show you what happened.
Yeah, sure.
You end up with all autistic children. And I think part of it too is we're now finally recognizing, first of all, the IQ tests, they're geared to a very specific type of learning. So if you are a verbal learner, you're going to ace them. Most autistics are visual learners. So automatically they're at a disadvantage. There are people inventing new tests to be more fair to everybody. So it covers kinesthetic learning, verbal, visual, etc. On average, people on the higher end of the autism spectrum, even on the tests that are kind of stacked against them a little, score 120s and above. They tend to be very smart. Now they're starting to realize even the ones that are nonverbal, if they're tested visually and not based on auditory, they're scoring that high too. So it's they've realized that the intellectual disability that's always been associated with autism is a secondary condition. It's not part of autism. In fact, in the diagnostic criteria, intelligence doesn't play into it at all. But the fact that if you think about someone with autism, for example, who's fascinated with dinosaurs at 5 or 6 years old, could list off scientific information and names that adults couldn't remember.
Sure.
That's
the typical image of that. And I was going to say, this is my final question, but yeah, maybe I'll ask it right now because you just brought it up. Is the movie Rain Man helpful?
No.
Okay, why not? I like the movie. I love the movie.
I absolutely love the movie, but here's the problem.
Did it perpetuate stereotypes or did it help?
It did. It perpetuated the stereotype, first of all, that autistics can't live on their own because he couldn't. If you think about it, he went from being in, structured living setting to living with his brother and then back again. It showed the stereotype of severe issues with socialization. And then it actually perpetuated one that you would think is positive, but actually isn't, and that's that autistics are savants.
Yes.
There is a difference. You are more likely to be a savant if you're autistic, but only 6% of autistics are savants.
What percentage of the regular population?
1.
Okay.
So you are more likely if you're autistic to also be a savant. But
that's where that word idiot savant comes from. That's a horrible word.
A lot of people with autism don't like that term because from this misunderstanding. But it also, you have the misunderstanding of, okay, you're a savant in this one area, but you can't function in anything else. I'm not an exception. I always put that out there. I am not an exception to the rule. Just I've got 5 kids that I've raised. I've only got 2 left at home, so I'd say I'm doing pretty good. The others are alive. They're out on their own. I got a bachelor's and a master's degree. I graduated top of my class in both. I'm a data scientist for a major company and have been promoted 3 times in 4 years. That's not uncommon. It's just not talked about. So our group at work, we have an employee resource group that I started that's for both people with autism and our colleagues whose children and family members are autistic. We went from 20 people a year ago to 500 already.
Hang on a second here. Can you tell me what company you work for?
Johnson & Johnson?
Okay, that's a big company. Yeah. So
Yes, it is.
yeah. So I mean, obviously
And
we're not representing them here. This is me and you talking, but so it started with 20 or 40, you said, and then now it's up to 500 in the network.
in a year.
Wow.
And of those, at least a third are autistic. So if you think about it, they're autistic adults working at a company like Johnson & Johnson, which means you've got to have at least, most likely, a master's degree, if not higher.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them are either in engineering, IT, or in the lab.
Mm-hmm.
So, that stereotype does tend to be true more often than not, but it doesn't mean that you won't find autistics who work in English and, sociology. They have really high IQs. Most of them have families. Many of them were diagnosed because their kids were diagnosed. That's what happened to me. So the first one got diagnosed, they're like, oh, this happens sometimes. The second one got diagnosed, they're like, Third one got diagnosed, they're like, you need to come here. We need to talk.
Sure.
And then when the fourth one was, they're like, we know it's you because it's two different cats. You were married twice.
I have to ask you one more question before I ask you the last one. Is there any statistics based on ethnicity or I don't know if the word race is the right word, like are Caucasians more likely than African Americans or Asians more likely, or is it just spread out across the population?
This is what's really fascinating and actually is what disproves a lot of the myths about where autism comes from. It doesn't matter what race you are. It doesn't matter where you live in the world. It doesn't matter whether you are a religion that believes in, like the Amish don't believe in any medical
interventions.
intervention. It doesn't matter what country you're from.
Mm-hmm.
Autism rates tend to hold steady within, I'd say, plus or minus 5 standard deviations.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I'm statistical there. So basically,
I understand that. I understand what that means.
But yeah, I figured you might, but I try not to do that because not everybody does. So
it's statistically irrelevant whether the levels of difference.
Exactly, and that's why things like diet, things like vaccination, medical care, things like that don't hold up to why causes for autism, because diet is very different depending what country you go to.
For sure.
An Asian or Latin American diet has different foods available than say an American diet.
Yeah, they're not eating Kentucky Fried Chicken down. Well, maybe they are.
Yeah. Actually, Japan, they eat it for
only
Christmas.
on Christmas.
That's for Christmas. Yes.
That's hilarious.
They don't have an oven big enough for a turkey or a ham, so yeah, KFC took advantage of that, and you have to order your KFC bucket 6 months in advance.
But do they even celebrate Christmas in Japan?
Oh yeah, they love it. They love any holiday.
Well, like the last,
Halloween just started over there.
Well, no, but you know that that the last place a crucifixion took place was in Japan. Like 100 years ago, they crucified a bunch of people.
Yeah.
Crazy Japanese people. Good for you. All right. So, final question here. Is our current, so when I say this, you're probably gonna know what I mean, but maybe I'll preface it a little bit. So, we live in a new age now. Facebook, Instagram, devices, video games, virtual reality, and coming on down the pipeline, and that provides us with the beauty of being able to do this, Angela, which is lovely. Yeah. But it also comes with other problems. Is the current, way in which the environment the kids live in, the digital world that's so screen based, is this exacerbating autistic symptoms?
In some ways, yes. And in some ways, no. And I'll explain. So the yes is kids with autism tend to already wake up in the morning overstimulated. So unlike neurotypical people who reset when they sleep, autistic children don't. So they're already overstimulated when they wake up in the morning. And then if you're throwing all these bright colors and lights and noise and everything at them all the time, they're going to melt down more because it's too much. On the flip side of that, things like virtual reality is helping kids learn to read facial expressions and social, so they can protect themselves. I don't want them to do it to try to be normal, but it is very well known that autistic people are frequently taken advantage of because you can't read someone's intent. So you tend to trust them and then you get hurt. So teaching them to recognize certain facial expressions that tell, for example, if someone's lying, could be very helpful in protecting them. It also has given a way for people who normally are not very socially, out there, going to parties, going to things like that, to connect. So most of the support groups that I run or that I help with or that I'm part of are online, including the one at work. We were one of the first ones to go completely virtual. Most of the employee resource groups at Johnson & Johnson are site-based. And then you might have one that's on numerous sites. Because we're dealing with people who are already overstimulated and who might struggle to be themselves as easily when they've got that anonymity, so you can hear them but you can't see them, we thought it best to start virtual and then do little events here and there at different sites, and it just exploded. Part of that too is a lot of us, for one reason or another, are forced to work from home. It may be because we don't live near a site, very common reason, but another one, like for example with me, I just can't find the right place to work at work. So right now I love my desk, except for the fact that the main printer is on the other side of the wall. So constant people back and forth, constant noise of the printer going off. I'm getting nothing done. I'm trying to do math. I can't have that going on.
Sure.
And I'm trying to do it in meetings. So they're like, well, why don't you wear headphones, listen to music? Well, because then I can't do my meetings. So two, it helped the parents of autistic children, because what people don't realize is the therapies that they try to get us to take our kids to, some of which are helpful, some I won't get into, but most autistic adults consider them abusive. And they're starting to find that autistic adults who went through these therapies suffer severe PTSD now. So, there's some of them that aren't very good. But for example, when my kids were little, all I was a taxi driver from this therapy to this one, to this one, to that one, to this one. I'd say two of them actually helped. The rest of them were just, that's how it's done. So they're trying to balance that and a career and their other children. They themselves might be on the spectrum. So doing it virtually helps. So it is it's a double-edged sword. You've got the kids who, because they have meltdowns all the time, the parents are shoving this device in their hands and say, just watch your video over and over again, and I don't have to listen to it, I don't have to deal with it, whatever. But that's not helping them in the long run, because yes, my kids and I all have our shows. Mine tend to be British comedies. I don't know why. British comedies just get me. My daughter and I share one, actually, the IT Crowd, favorite show. She can quote every season, every show from start to finish. She knows the whole thing. That's one of her talents. But I watch it when I need comfort or when I just need the background noise. But it would not be healthy for me if I were a child and my parent just had me watch that over and over again and never exposed me to anything else. And by giving them that device and saying, here's how you play your movie, that kid's now not exposed to anything else. And it's separating them from the family. So, like,
I think that's unhealthy for all the kids, though. I think all kids could fall victim to that. Yeah. I have four,
that's why we have no devices at the dinner table is a rule in our house, because I don't make you socialize with me for the rest of the day. You can talk to me for 15 minutes after I just cooked you dinner.
Yeah, sure. So I'm gonna ask you one more. I promise this will be the last one. I could keep going. We could keep going, but I actually have to run. But you said us.
Yes.
So the people in the autism community, so support people, parents, and people with autism.
Mhm.
They consider themselves a community. There's infighting within the community, like a community, like
Just
any
like a
community,
family.
like any
Yeah.
community. There's infighting. Where are you
Mhm.
guys going? Like, what is it like? This has been, I remember starting to hear about autism, kind of like the late '90s, and then the
Yes.
whole vaccine thing came out and exploded and ended up being false, right? I
Yes.
think
And it
so.
ended up, and he got his license taken away. He
Yeah,
made it all up just for money to
well,
get
that's
more
really
funding.
evil, actually, really evil. And
He,
people are
well, I
still
will.
recovering from that. There's people that still believe that.
Oh, it's still what. That's why we have a measles epidemic in this country, and the
Yeah,
moment too. But part of it is I think this generation and the one before are so separated from the deaths that were happening when we didn't have the vaccines,
oh, for
and that's
sure.
the problem. That's the
Oh,
problem.
yeah. No, what's interesting is that it's like I don't need a vaccine. Yeah, you ever had rubella? You ever seen rubella before? You know what I mean?
Ooh,
It's like we got rid of
you
that.
want polio?
Yeah,
Let's talk about polio for a minute. But yeah,
yeah.
even my husband's grandmother is totally deaf because she got scarlet fever when
Mm,
she was 3, lost her hearing. People don't realize the damage, the permanent damage that these diseases did. There's a reason we made vaccines.
yes.
And honestly, as an autistic individual, I'd rather an autistic child than a dead one.
I,
Autism's not fatal.
but autism is not caused by inoculation from
It is
vaccines.
not.
And
No.
I'm not a scientist, but I have read
No.
article after article after article for people saying this guy was a liar. He's caused so
Yeah,
many deaths to happen because of his lies. He might even be considered a
absolutely.
murderer, actually.
I would consider him so because of the number of children, including children who couldn't be vaccinated, who have died.
Yeah, like some people
Because
actually are allergic to the what I don't know what it is, but there's
or they're
something they put.
under two. There's
Yeah.
there's an egg substitute that's
Yeah, the
used that's
herd the herd
used
immunity. They have this herd. There's like
exactly
something called herd immunity where 99% of people are vaccinated, but when only 85% of people are vaccinated, now the people that are really vulnerable end up in
are
trouble.
not exactly. So yeah, that there's a lot of infighting in the community. That's one of them. Honestly, most of the autism community doesn't see them as part of the community because they essentially they hate us.
The vaccine,
Um,
the no vax
the
people.
the non-vaxxers, they tend to despise us. And I'm not saying that every non-vaxxer everywhere hates autistic individuals. I don't want to be quoted as having said that,
Yeah, sure.
but a lot of the fighting comes from you're hurting your child, you're putting all these poisons, you caused your child's autism.
Oh, yeah.
And
This is
that's
the guilt and
really
shame
hurtful.
crap. Yeah.
Exactly. And it doesn't matter what science you show them because they're not ready yet. I don't hate them. I don't feel like they're bad people. I feel bad for them. They're in so much pain that they have to blame someone. And that's how it's coming out. And I feel bad for their children because their child is perfectly fine the way they are. It comes
Mm.
down to unconditional love. You love your child no matter what. And I'm not saying they don't love their children, but part of love is acceptance.
No, but
And that's
you know
from
who they're not loving?
themselves.
Themselves.
Their child is autistic because of genetics, and that's them. And that's where I
Okay,
think a lot of the hate.
their child is autistic, diabetic, epileptic, gay. Insert whatever you want. It isn't
Yeah.
about you, actually.
No, it's about your child. And that's the
Yes.
problem is that they are, and that's why we don't, a lot of us don't like that whole I'm an autism mom thing. I'm an autism mom. I'm autistic and I'm a mom. You are not a stronger, better person just because you have an autistic child. You have the genes for autism. That's what makes you a person with an autistic child. Not that you're stronger, because there are bumper stickers out there that actually say, God chose me to be an autistic mom because I was so much stronger. First of all, you're implying that handling an autistic child is so hard. You have to be a unique type of person to ever be able to do it. Second of all, you're kind of looking down on all the other moms out there, you know? So it's just where we're hoping to
You
go
know what that is?
is
That's like, you know what it is? That's interesting. just to disrupt you. So I would only say this to you, and then everyone can listen to it if they want to listen to this. But that comes from a place where you're like it. Oh man, I'm gonna get myself in trouble. I better say this right. It's like your child's not good enough to be your child.
Yes. Yes.
Because
Exactly.
I'm so awesome. So my genes are perfect, can't you see? So I should have the perfect child, but I don't. So God made me special because I don't have the perfect child or
It's
something.
still blame. You're blaming God now.
Yeah,
You're
sure.
blaming a being that may or may not exist, because I'm a theist, so I'm kind of, not sure. Grew up Catholic, so that's a weird mix. But you're blaming a being that you can't confront, that you can't discuss this with, and you're saying that it was some sort of a gift to you because you are so much better than everybody else.
Something like there's something
And
that's
it's
being
really
there's an ego narcissistic thing going
Yeah.
on there being expressed. They're indulging themselves in their suffering in a way. Instead of accepting
and they're
it.
not focused on their child's suffering that they're causing. They're only focused on themselves.
Only
It's
you,
similar to this whole need
only
to take your picture all the time, like this whole selfie generation thing. It's
yes.
that.
Only you can say that from the autistic community perspective, not me.
Right. Well,
Angela,
and it is something what we're moving towards. Just so to end on that, inclusion and acceptance. That's all we want. We're human beings too. We have feelings. We want friends. We want people around, and we want to be allowed to be who we are. And right now, there's a battle between the people who say we should be who we are and the people who say you're not good enough. You need to be like us. So that battle is what we're trying to end, because nobody should be told they're not good enough just because they're not the same as somebody else.
I think you're right about that, but I also think that you need to unite your community around something. Get rid of the
Yes.
shame portion of it. Get the shame out. Get the that indulging of your own narcissism and grief.
It would require therapy, which would be terrific because we need more resources in general in mental health.
The autistic people in the autistic community are not the only ones that need
No,
therapy.
I know mental health in general, we need a lot, but
and typical people need therapy too sometimes.
Absolutely. I think we all need it. We all
Sure.
go through challenges, but
Sure.
we've got to get the communities online under control too, because there are groups that promote themselves as autism groups, help groups. Some of them are huge worldwide groups where their true goal is to eradicate autism. And they
cure it. You mean to cure it or something like that? To cure it?
In a way. They're trying to make it so you can tell if, for example, the baby's autistic before they're born.
So you can terminate the pregnancy.
There's actually a country in Europe, I won't name which one, that there are no more Down syndrome babies being born. This is a fact. I will not name which one because I don't want to make people angry at me. I don't know who's what. We can talk offline about that if you want me to call it out, but we have a member of our group that lives there. And he said where they're moving with autism now too is they want to just be, we're not good enough, we're broken, so don't exist.
It's interesting that now you're into the pro-life. It's interesting how convoluted the pro-choice, pro-life debate is becoming.
And I'm very
It's actually really interesting because in Canada, that's complicated too, because in Canada, we have a large Asian population.
Oh.
And in Ontario, and we have a large people from all over the world actually, and they value male children more than female children. So they're selectively aborting female fetuses. And
which they haven't learned yet, because now they've run out of females in China. Well, seriously, this actually is happening. They have so many more men than women. The birth rate's plummeted.
That's a recipe for, that's a whole podcast. That's a recipe for chaos. Yeah. So whenever the male population exceeds the female population, you usually end up in war, but that's a whole other story.
Or disease too, unfortunately, because the world's got balance.
For sure. So you're in the
But
process of writing a book.
yes, I am.
Uh, when it comes out, you have to email me. Okay.
I will. I
Where
will.
can people find your TEDx talk? Is it on YouTube?
Yeah, well, there's a copy of, I have to be careful how I say this. So the TEDx was done through my company. So they have
Mhm.
rights to the original, but the
Okay.
exact same talk was done again and is on YouTube.
Okay. How do people
So
find
all I
it?
have
You
to
are your
do is
brain?
be able to, it's just under my name. It's
Okay.
called We Are Our Brains.
We are our
Um,
brains.
yeah,
So search that up and type in Angela Andrews beside it and it will come up.
absolutely. And I've done some other talks recently. I haven't posted them yet, but looking to start a blog too. People who have questions, want to talk, I always say reach out to me. I love helping people. So the reason I do what I do is if I can help even one person,
Mm.
then everything I do is worth it. So, help one person feel better about being autistic, help one parent feel better about having a child that's autistic. I mean, I hope someday it goes from, I'm sorry your child has autism, to congratulations, you have a neurodiverse child. Here's
Mm.
what that means.
Well,
You know,
it's interesting about that because there's a campaign from an eyeglasses company in Canada years ago.
hmm,
And the eyeglasses company put out the tagline, I think it was, "Are you lucky enough to need glasses?" And there was a huge backlash against this. Like people were
yes, there
really
will
angry
be.
about that, right? So I
Oh, yeah.
don't I don't know if it's congratulations, but I'll tell you this. If you wanted to help one person, you helped me understand autism a lot more, and I really appreciate that.
Oh, great. It was my pleasure. I could talk all day about it.
I'm
So
sure you
it's
could.
absolutely my pleasure to be here.
Thank you for being a guest on the Get a Grip on Life podcast.
Thank you for having me.
If you're listening to this right now, check out Angela Andrews' YouTube video. We Are Our Brains. Just search it up on YouTube and you can check it out and contact her through that. If otherwise, thank you for listening to the show. I'm super grateful if you got this far. Another long one for you guys out there. I always learn when I do this and I love it. If you want to start a podcast, you want to create some digital media and you need some help, call Scotty, the producer. Go to getagripstudios.com. The phone number's on the website. We are there for you if you want to start it. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.